I wasn't looking for anything special when I found the listing. Just a quiet place, tucked away from the city noise, a little refuge after a rough breakup and a restless few months. The house was older than most, the kind with stories in its walls. Creaky floorboards that whispered beneath my steps, windows framed by winding ivy that caught the afternoon light and softened the world outside. The air smelled faintly of sandalwood and something crisp, maybe dried linen that had soaked up summer sun. It was the kind of scent you'd never notice unless you really stopped and breathed it in. And for once I did. She was waiting when I arrived. Claire, the landlady. She had this quiet grace about her, a confidence that didn't shout but settled in the room like a calm melody. Mid-40s, maybe early 40s, with soft lines around her eyes that told me she'd lived and felt deeply. Her hair was pulled back loosely, a few strands escaping like she didn't mind them. She wore a long, knitted sweater that fell just past her hips, soft and comfortable, and jeans that looked well-worn but cared for. When she handed me the keys, our fingers brushed. That small contact surprised me. Her hand was warm and steady, like the kind of touch that could anchor you without words. She smiled then, just the barest curve of her lips, but it reached her eyes and made them crinkle in a way that felt genuine. "This place will grow on you," she said, voice low and smooth, as if sharing a secret. "Old houses like this, they have a way of holding people close." I nodded, feeling more than a little out of place in my new surroundings. The nervous energy of moving was still buzzing in my veins, but her presence was soothing, like a steady pulse beneath the surface. She led me through the house, pointing out quirks, the squeaky floorboards in the hall, the draft near the kitchen window, the patch of sunlight that always lingered on the living room rug around noon. I listened, taking it all in, watching the way she moved through the rooms with easy familiarity, like she'd made this place a home long ago and wasn't about to let it go. I caught myself watching her more than the house. There was something quietly magnetic about her, how she stood with a gentle strength, how her laughter came softly, almost like a surprise, as if she wasn't used to letting herself go. When she smiled at me again before leaving, it was like the first crack of light at dawn, subtle but full of promise. That night, as I lay in my new room with the window open just enough to let in the cool night air, I could still feel the echo of her touch on my fingers. It was strange, this feeling of being seen, but not in a way that rushed or pushed. Just quietly acknowledged. I wasn't ready to admit it, but I was already looking forward to tomorrow. Days settled into a gentle rhythm. I started to find comfort in the small routines, the quiet creak of the floor beneath my feet, the way the sunlight spilled through the windows in golden streams, painting the dust motes dancing in the air. But what settled most deeply wasn't the house itself, but Claire. She was there in the mornings, often already in the kitchen when I passed through to grab coffee. Our hellos had grown warmer, less formal, like two neighbors who'd learned to share a little piece of their days. She'd ask about the heater or the leak near the back door, small details that showed she cared without needing to say much. One morning, she caught me off guard. The rain had been steady for hours, thick enough to blur the garden outside into a watercolor. She invited me in from the cold with an offer of tea, her voice low and gentle, like she was offering something rare. The kitchen smelled of earth and honey, of fresh herbs drying on the windowsill. As I stepped inside, the warmth wrapped around me like a soft blanket. Claire moved with a kind of quiet grace, sleeves rolled up to her elbows, steam curling from a kettle on the stove. Her hair was pinned loosely, tendrils framing her face, just so simple, effortless beauty that made me catch my breath without meaning to. She handed me a mug, fingers brushing mine again, light, fleeting but electric in its subtlety. That touch lingered in my mind long after I'd taken the cup. We didn't talk much at first. Sometimes, silence said more than words ever could. I watched how her eyes softened when she thought I wasn't looking, how her smile grew just a little wider when I made some quiet joke that landed better than I expected. And I caught myself hoping to hear again. There was one moment in the narrow hallway when our arms bumped as we passed, and I swear the world held still. Her hand lingered near mine, just an inch or two away, like we were both waiting to see if the other would reach out. But neither of us did. Instead, she glanced at me quickly, cheeks faintly flushed, and I felt my own skin warm. Her presence was a paradox, strong and steady, yet somehow fragile underneath. I noticed how she rubbed her neck when she thought I wasn't paying attention, how she'd glance out the window with a distant look, like memories were passing behind her eyes. At night, the house seemed quieter than before, less empty somehow. I'd find myself replaying the smallest moments, the soft brush of her hand, the way her voice dipped when she said my name, the scent of rosemary and citrus that clung to her skin. It wasn't love yet. Not quite, but it was close. Like the pause before a story begins, the breath you hold just before a smile breaks free. Something was shifting between us, subtle and slow. I was beginning to understand that this wasn't just a landlord and tenant. It was something more, fragile, tender, waiting to be named. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe I was ready to find out what that might be. It started as a joke, something light to break the easy silence between us. Claire was pouring coffee in the kitchen one late morning, the sunlight slipping in through the curtains in warm, lazy beams. She caught my eye, a mischievous spark lighting up behind her calm, confident gaze. "You know," she said with a soft chuckle, "your rent is due in kisses." Her voice was playful, but there was something beneath it, a flicker of something unspoken, like the joke was a mask for a question neither of us dared to voice. I laughed a little too quickly and tried to play it off. "Guess I better start saving up," I said, grinning, hoping to keep things light. But the joke hung between us longer than it should have. Her eyes held mine a beat too long, and for a moment, I felt like the room had shrunk, like all the space between us had collapsed. She looked away first, a faint flush coloring her cheeks. The air shifted, charged and quiet, like a storm gathering just out of sight. I wasn't sure if she really meant it, or if it was just a teasing way to keep things from growing too serious. But the way her fingers brushed the edge of the counter, lingering there, told me she wasn't entirely joking, and I realized I wasn't either. That afternoon, I found myself watching her more closely, the way her lips curved when she thought no one was looking, how her laughter softened when she was near me, how her eyes searched mine like she was trying to figure something out. One evening, as she handed me the rent receipt slipped into an envelope, her fingers grazed mine just a second longer than necessary. The touch was light, electric, like the whisper of a promise. I felt my pulse quicken, warmth flooding through my chest. For a moment, it felt like the world held its breath. Later, I caught her standing by the window, looking out at the quiet street. The fading light wrapped around her like a halo, softening her silhouette. She turned, and our eyes met again, silent, tentative. I saw the flicker of something vulnerable behind her steady gaze, a hesitation I recognized. I wanted to reach out, to close the distance between us, but the weight of unspoken words held me back. The house, usually so familiar, suddenly felt like unfamiliar territory, full of possibilities and risks I wasn't sure I was ready to take. That night, I lay awake replaying every glance, every touch. The line between landlord and tenant blurred, and I realized I was no longer just living here. I was waiting for something I didn't yet have the courage to name. There was desire in the quiet moments, yes, but it wasn't loud or demanding. It was patient, like the slow unfolding of dawn. And just as I thought I might step closer, she'd pull away, as if testing how far I was willing to follow. The joke about rent had changed everything. It was no longer a joke at all. The storm came without warning. Dark clouds rolling in fast, swallowing the afternoon light and drumming relentless rain against the windows. The kind of storm that made the old house creak and sigh, like it was holding its breath along with us. I was sitting in the living room, half listening to the rain's steady rhythm, when the power flickered and then went out completely. Darkness spilled across the rooms, wrapping everything in shadow. A candle flickered to life on the kitchen table, casting a soft, warm glow that pushed back the blackness in a trembling dance. Claire appeared in the doorway, holding a bottle of red wine and 2 glasses. Her face was softly illuminated by the candlelight, and for a moment, I saw something vulnerable flicker behind her usual calm. She motioned me toward the kitchen with a quiet invitation I couldn't refuse. The house smelled different in the dark, closer, more intimate. The scent of rain-wet earth seeped through the slightly cracked window, mixing with the warmth of the wine and the faint trace of her herbal perfume, rosemary and citrus, lingering in the air. We settled at the table, the candlelight throwing gentle shadows across her face, tracing the graceful lines of her cheekbones and the curve of her lips. She poured the wine with a careful hand, the rich red liquid catching the light like a secret. Our conversation started hesitantly, cautious and careful, like we were testing the water before diving in. Then, slowly, words began to flow. She told me about her past, about a marriage that had quietly unraveled over time, the moments that felt like tiny cracks turning into something unfixable. Her voice softened when she spoke of regrets, of what she had lost and what she still hoped to find. I listened, watching how her fingers curled tightly around the stem of her glass, knuckles whitening with the effort to keep composure. For the first time, the confident woman I admired seemed fragile, just like me. When I spoke, I shared pieces of my own story, broken relationships, restless years, the loneliness that had brought me here. The walls between us melted away, replaced by a quiet understanding that felt both comforting and terrifying. Then, almost without thinking, her hand reached out. It was tentative at first, just the tips of her fingers brushing mine across the table. The contact was electric, warm, grounding. I could feel the steady beat of her pulse, quickening slightly as our fingers intertwined, as if we were both testing if this was real. She looked down at our hands, then back up at me, eyes searching mine. I saw the flicker of doubt and hope tangled together, a hesitation that mirrored my own. For a moment, the storm outside faded into the background, the world reduced to the warmth of candlelight, the softness of her touch, the fragile intimacy growing between us. No words were needed. The silence held everything, the longing, the fear, the promise. And as thunder rumbled softly in the distance, I realized that the real storm was inside us, one we both needed to face. The days after the storm felt different, like the air between us had shifted, thickened, as if the fragile bridge we'd built was suddenly under strain. Claire's presence, once a steady comfort, began to feel like a quiet question hanging just out of reach. Our easy conversations grew shorter, the lingering touches more fleeting. She kept her distance, a little more guarded, and I found myself pulling back too, unsure of where I stood, afraid of crossing some invisible line neither of us was ready to name. I told myself it was nothing, just the natural awkwardness after sharing too much too soon. But deep down, I knew it was more. It was the weight of things left unsaid, the tension in every glance that didn't quite meet, the silence in rooms that once held laughter. One evening, I was sitting in the living room when I heard soft music drifting from her side of the house. Nina Simone, her voice rich and melancholic, weaving through the shadows. Drawn by the sound, I found Claire sitting alone near the window, her knees drawn up, a glass of wine untouched at her side. The candlelight flickered softly, casting a warm glow over her face, pale and vulnerable. Her eyes caught mine, surprised but not displeased. She didn't say anything, just shifted to make room beside her. I hesitated for a moment, then moved closer, the space between us suddenly charged. We sat side by side, close enough that I could feel the gentle heat of her leg brushing against mine. Neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of everything we were afraid to say aloud. Her head leaned against my shoulder, light and unsteady, and I felt the quiet steadiness of her heartbeat against me. The sound was slow, reassuring, a reminder that she was real, here, with me. I wanted to reach out, to close the gap that had opened between us, but the fear of disrupting this delicate balance held me still. Instead, I rested my hand lightly on hers, letting the touch speak the words we couldn't say. In that moment, I understood the truth we were both avoiding. This wasn't just a landlord and tenant anymore. It was something fragile and beautiful, something that could break if we weren't careful. After a long while, she pulled back slightly and smiled. A small, tired smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Maybe I'm not as good at this as I thought," she whispered. I shook my head gently. "Neither am I." For the first time, we acknowledged the distance growing between us, not with blame or frustration, but with quiet understanding. We were both hesitant, unsure how to move forward without risking everything. That night, I lay awake, replaying the feeling of her head on my shoulder, the warmth of her hand in mine. The ache of closeness mixed with the ache of distance. I knew we needed to face what was between us soon, or risk losing it altogether. The next morning dawned soft and pale, the kind of quiet light that feels like a fresh start. Claire was already in the kitchen when I woke, the faint sound of her humming blending with the clink of dishes and the gentle hiss of the coffee maker. The house felt different, lighter somehow, as if the night had washed away some of the tension that had been hanging between us. I found her by the window, sunlight catching in her hair, turning it to strands of gold. She glanced up when I entered, and for the first time in days, there was no hesitation in her smile, just a gentle warmth that reached all the way to my chest. Without a word, I crossed the room and sat beside her, close enough that our shoulders brushed lightly. The simple touch was electric, soft, and steady, like the first notes of a song you've been waiting to hear. I could feel the steady beat of her pulse beneath her skin, calm but alive. "About yesterday," I began, voice low and careful. "I don't want to lose what we have." Her eyes held mine, sincere and searching, and then she nodded slowly. "Neither do I, but it's hard, isn't it, to let someone in when you've been hurt before?" Her honesty cracked open something inside me. I reached out, my fingers lightly tracing the back of her hand, a touch that was both question and promise. "I'm scared too," I admitted, "but maybe that's what makes it worth trying." She sighed, a soft breath that seemed to carry away years of silence and guarded walls. Her hand found mine, intertwining fingers in a quiet but deliberate way. The warmth of her skin was grounding, a reminder that vulnerability wasn't weakness. It was the beginning of something real. We talked then, really talked, not just about the house or rent or the weather, but about hopes, fears, and the kind of loneliness that doesn't always show on the surface. She shared stories from her youth, the dreams she'd set aside, and the quiet moments of joy she still found in unexpected places. I told her about the restlessness that brought me here, the mistakes I'd made, and the small hope that maybe this place, this unexpected connection, could be a turning point. There was no rush, no grand declarations, just two people carefully peeling back the layers that had kept them apart for too long. At one point, her head settled gently against my shoulder, her breath warm and steady against my skin. I felt the softness of her hair brushing my cheek, the light pressure of her hand tightening slightly in mine. It was an unspoken promise, a quiet affirmation that we were willing to try. Outside, the world continued on, but in that moment, the house felt like a sanctuary, a place where age, past wounds, and fear didn't matter. Only the quiet beauty of connection. I realized then that love didn't have to be loud or dramatic. Sometimes it was just this, the slow, steady weaving of two lives, the soft touches and shared silences, the willingness to be seen and to see in return. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't afraid. The days that followed felt like gentle unfolding, like a morning stretching its arms, soft and slow, welcoming a new kind of light. Claire and I moved through the house differently now, not just as tenant and landlady, but as two people beginning to find their way toward each other. Our interactions grew warmer, the touches less hesitant. A brush of her hand against my arm when she handed me the mail, the way she'd pause just a heartbeat longer in the doorway when I was leaving, the quiet moments shared over cups of tea where silence spoke louder than words. One afternoon, the rain began again, light and steady, tapping against the windows like a soft reminder of the world outside. We sat together in the living room, close on the worn sofa, a shared blanket draped over our knees. Her head found my shoulder without a word, the softness of her hair a gentle weight against me. I felt the slow, steady rhythm of her breath and the warmth of her hand slipping into mine. That simple contact carried all the unspoken promises we'd made, the quiet commitment to be there for each other, no matter what the future held. In that moment, the house wasn't just a building anymore. It was home. We talked about small things, the plans for the garden, recipes we wanted to try, the books lining the shelves that we'd yet to read together. The conversation flowed naturally, like two streams merging, growing stronger with every shared word. She smiled at me then, a look that was both confident and tender, the kind of smile that comes from knowing someone truly understands you. "I never thought I'd find this again," she said softly. "Not like this." I squeezed her hand gently, my heart full. Neither did I. The age between us felt like a distant echo, no longer a barrier, but a part of the rich tapestry that made our story unique. Our differences became the threads weaving us closer, each moment building a quiet intimacy that was all our own. That evening, as the sky faded from blue to a soft, twilight purple, we stood together by the front door. The world outside was calm, but inside, I felt a steady warmth that went deeper than any words. She looked up at me, eyes shimmering in the fading light, and brushed a loose strand of hair behind my ear with a tender, lingering touch. Her fingers grazed my cheek, gentle and sure, and for a heartbeat, time seemed to pause. Then softly, she whispered, "Thank you for staying." I smiled, my own voice low and steady. "Thank you for letting me." We stepped inside together, the door closing quietly behind us. The house was filled with the soft glow of lamps, the scent of lavender and worn books, and the promise of something new. It wasn't a whirlwind romance or a sudden leap. It was something slower, steadier, richer, the kind of love that grows quietly, patiently like roots finding soil. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I truly belonged.